Good to go.
Welcome to another edition of Consensus Unreality. Before we get to tonight's interview, I'm going to direct you over to patreon.com/consensus unreality. For just $5 a month, you get access to our full episode archive, over 150 hours of exclusive episodes, which are ongoing and will include an afterwards following up this interview tonight. We are joined by John Kozik of the Salem Witch Board Museum and now of the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore as well. The founder of both of those, and also a founding member of the Talking Board Historical Society. We're very excited because we're definitely talking board enthusiasts, and I think we've been eagerly waiting for somebody to come on and talk to us about this rich subject. So what was it that kind of got that turned the gears for you about the talking board? What was the first thing? Was it when you were a kid? Did you see one or something like that?
No, well, hey guys, thanks for having me.
Sure.
My first real interest started after I inherited my grandmother's Ouija board. You know, as a kid, I had spied on her using it alone, flying on the thing, yelling out letters and numbers quicker than people could write down what she was saying. And but I inherited that board in the late 90s. And I think it's what most people think about when they think of a Ouija board. It has the couples in the corners using it, and kind of very iconic image for the Ouija. But I went online at that time to learn more about it, and I just couldn't believe that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of different competitors, manufacturers making them, all competing against Ouija. And so that's what made me start obsessively collecting them, of course. And when I 6 years into collecting, I finally met my friend Robert Murch and Calvin and Rick, and we ended up forming, and Mike Zone, and we ended up starting a group called the Talking Board Historical Society. And that was really a nonprofit that, for research, preserve, celebrating the history of the boards. And through that, I'd say my passion for it I went way into it after that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. That's so funny. The Ouija board I currently own, I bought from Mike, so it's kind
Nice.
of a fun connection there. Yeah, I
He
think
gets
it's
around.
he does. He has like a pile of them. What do you remember what the board was that you inherited, or like what variety?
Yeah, I mean, it was a William Feld board made in the 1930s.
Mm.
And what's funny is the planchette, the board is very well worn. You can see just one of the more well-worn boards I have in the museum and in the collection. The planchette, she would wear out the felt on it really quickly. And so she would just dab Elmer's glue, put a piece of felt and just, randomly cut it out, almost like a pit stop, like in a racetrack or something like that. So the planchette looks a little janky, but it was very well used.
Mm. Did she have like affiliations with spiritualism or?
Yeah, exactly. She learned how to use the board from her grandmother,
Mm.
and my great grandmother. She was a founding member of a spiritualist church down the Cape, down Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And so my grandmother, I don't know if I would call her a spiritualist. She grew up around it, but I know she believed in an afterlife, and very spiritual person for sure.
Very cool. Yeah. So that's an interesting point right there, because I think a lot of the pop cultural associations with the Ouija board, the talking board, are probably overwhelmingly negative and demonic, right? But you're you're jumping into it from this what I assume is a more positive view, right?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm certainly, watching her use it. Um, but later on, she did have a bad experience using it. And so she actually put it in a black trash bag and would put it under her couch.
Mm.
And I didn't know much about it other than, I'd be playing hide and seek with my sister or something. And I'd be next to the Ouija board. My sister would be like, "You're next to the Ouija." And I just thought to be scared of it, to be honest with you,
Huh.
even though I'd seen her use it years earlier, but I kind of grew up a little bit of afraid of her. But I'm older. I grew up during the Satanic Panic,
Mm.
here in America. And so, not until I really like started learning more about them that I was like, wait a minute, it's not evil by over the most time that it's been around, not considered evil by most people, I should say. And so that's probably the most fascinating thing to me is that, most people tend to only think of it from a real negative kind of standpoint or a horror movie or something like that, but it has history much older than that, and just not as dark as you might think.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess
Huh.
let's maybe develop that history for those people that don't know. What's the starting point? How old is it actually? And what's kind of the development of the talking board as a product that ended up in a lot of our homes as kids?
Yeah, so the spiritualist movement in America in the mid 1800s, Civil War, post Civil War, everyone wanting to talk to the who they had lost in the war. And in that time, there's a whole lot of spirit communication tools being used. Stuff from Europe, seances, table tipping, pendulum, tarot. And one of the things here, the birth of modern spiritualism in America, started just before the Civil War with the Fox sisters. And they were these sisters just outside of Rochester who had made a claim that they could communicate with spirits they had heard knocking responses back to them. And so their news traveled. They were very famous in their day. And, once the Civil War comes, people were making that same claim. And the conversation kind of evolves from just yes and no questions, waiting for a knock or two, to eventually trying to count knocks to figure out what letter of the alphabet that they might correspond with. And it's very long conversations. They end up getting sped up when they lay out alphabet cards and eventually an alphabet board, where now you can ask a spirit a question and just with your finger start pointing to the alphabet and waiting for a knock from the spirit, start spelling out messages. One of the devices from Europe was called an automatic writing planchette, which looks very similar to what you might see with the Ouija board today, but it had a pencil in the front of it and wheels in the back. And the device worked by somebody channeling a spirit through themselves and then writing or drawing on a piece of paper, whatever came through. So, really, these two things end up crossing paths. They speed up conversation from pointing to now, writing or drawing can just point directly to the alphabet. So they're homemade for a number of years until 1890, when a businessman in Baltimore, Charles Kennard, produces the first one. And he just calls it a witchboard and kind of a generic name. A few months later, a woman named Helen Peters, she asked the board what it wanted to be called, and it spelled back Ouija. She asked, "What does it mean?" And the board spelled back "good luck." So the board named itself, and Ouija became the first mass-produced board.
Mm.
Wow.
And then the William Fold comes in the mix as well, right? And isn't there's sort of a fateful end with Fold?
Yeah, I mean, Fold is there working in the company as early as 1892, and bunch of the people involved with the company kind of leave, and he eventually gets to take over production of it. He pays back a royalty to the original manufacturers, and he takes control. And by 1897, he's the sole person making the Ouija board. And again, the Ouija, when it came out, it was protected by a patent for 16 years. So legally, no one else could make an alphabet board with a separate pointing device. So he's doing pretty well in 1897 with no real competition. Um, but eventually, he uses the Ouija board and it tells him that he should build a second factory in Baltimore, or it actually tells him he should prepare for big business. And he interpreted that as building a factory, second factory. Years later, he ended up supervising the installation of a flagpole up on the roof and ended up falling off the roof and dying from his injuries. And on his deathbed, he told his family, "Don't sell Ouija," to which we're not really sure what he meant. Don't sell the Ouija board or the Ouija brand. But regardless, 39 years to the day, on the anniversary of his death, that's the day that William Fold's family sold to Parker Brothers in Salem. And then they took over
Uh,
production from there.
Mm.
huh.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what
Yeah.
what are all these other boards that kind of come about? Are they all post sale to Parker Brothers or are they illicit? Like what's the deal with the sort of
Well,
competitors?
You see competitors right away. Some people are making boards that they think are different enough that it would infringe on the patent. Having not just the alphabet and numbers, but maybe having a few words spelled out, which would kind of improve on the Ouija by speeding up conversation. But really, those first 16 years of the patent holds for Ouija, there's not a ton of competitors making talking boards. There are other weird devices coming about, um, spirit communication tools that don't infringe on the patent. But once the patent expires, World War I is right around the corner. And so it becomes very competitive in the marketplace from there. And so talking boards, spirit boards, witch boards, the generic name for these, people are allowed to make them. But really, once you see World War II, I would consider probably the most competitive time because in America, there's probably, 40, 50 different manufacturers making these boards by World War II. So it's big business the whole time. And some of them, improve, some of them just copy Ouija, maybe sell it for less money. And quite a few boards actually just steal the name, the trademark, which is still owned today by Hasbro today, but they steal the name and put it on there. So World War II, there's probably 10 different boards that say Ouija on them that are counterfeits or fakes. And what's interesting about those boards is I point that out to some people at the museum that, that didn't have permission to use the name. Some people will actually come back and be like, oh, yeah, yeah, those don't work. So people start believing that if it's not made by the person who's legally supposed to be making the Ouija, that,
Right.
it's not going to work the same.
A
Yeah, I was gonna
binding
ask you about that.
contract.
I was gonna ask like if there's a difference of, efficacy between the different, brands and formations, and is that something that you have noticed people noticing?
Oh, I think 100%. I often make a comparison that, if I go to a restaurant, I ask for a Coke and they tell me, is Pepsi okay? No joke. I leave the restaurant. I will not drink Pepsi, you
That's
know?
a good
Uh,
answer too.
so I think that is kind of what happens with Ouija is that's first 16 years where that's all people read about, talked about, and used. It was pretty difficult for some of these other manufacturers to make a board because they're competing against that name brand that everyone knows. Um, but for as far as it working, I believe they're all kind of the same. But if you believe something wouldn't work as well as something else, it probably won't. You'll influence the board. I meet people who have beliefs that like it has to be a wooden board, it has to be close to the earth, and it's going to work better than something made of plastic. That making the board, putting their energy into it, would make it work better than something made in a factory. So when I sell Ouija boards, I have to kind of talk it out what their belief is to get them into the right board that they feel comfortable with. Some people, they don't want a used board. They think that maybe there's something attached to it, so they want something brand new. So
Mhm.
there's all different kind of beliefs, and those beliefs that you have, which could be different than someone else's, no one's wrong, but it could influence how it works for you.
Mm,
Yeah.
very interesting. So how much experience have you put in of your own time dabbling on the board?
I have not put a lot of time into it. When I was younger, as a kid, I certainly used it at a sleepover. Um, and I can't say anything really profound happened then. Um, but after I inherited my grandmother's, and like, and see, it's pretty well worn. It doesn't work for me like it did for her.
Mm,
And so I've been a musician for a very long time. I often make a joke that if Jimi Hendrix was my father, I wouldn't play guitar. And that's kind of how I feel about the Ouija. So, I mean, I believe they work. They work differently for everybody, but I'm very nervous about it not working for me. Not something bad happening, just it
mm,
not working. So at this point, I'm waiting to use it. My friend Karen, she's used the Ouija for over 50 years, never had a bad experience. She gets very positive, inspirational messages from the board. And so I'm just waiting to cross paths with her to use it with her next.
mm. Very cool. Yeah, I remember when I was probably about 15 years old, had a really fun experience using the Ouija board with some friends on an afternoon. And my one friend telling some incredibly, I don't know if they were tall tales or actually paranormal tales about his own experience making Ouija boards and having things happen. Of course, my mother had some incredible Ouija board stories of our own with like the lights turning on and off and stuff like that. The kind of great poltergeist of like effects while using the board. Um, Me and Ben on the show have done a few different Ouija sessions. We were doing it's still really an ongoing project over the course of the last 5 years on the show. And some it's really sort of a superimposition of like divining maybe synchronicity or some kind of connected informational web onto locations. So we've done Ouija sessions, but simultaneously would you know use other kind of randomized uh, practices like bibliomancy or randonautica, actually generating locations and sort of just like tracing the meaning of things that would come up. And I would say in that we had some really interesting results on the Ouija board
Yeah.
as well. One of them was the word when we asked the question. I think it was like something like what does all this mean? And the word Voynich was spelled out,
Hmm.
which obviously I'm sure you're familiar with the Voynich manuscript, but that was kind of hilarious. And Voynich I didn't realize until now, but Voynich was a rare book dealer, which is an interesting connection. Also, another thing that was spelled out was Iwas, which was hilarious to us, which had a connection to the Book of the Law and the Aleister Crowley and all that. But yeah, I mean, so I think that was kind of it's nice to talk to you about the history of Ouija because we've talked about it so much on the show. Have you like gathered any stories from people about their own paranormal experiences that have stuck out over the years?
Yeah, I mean, people do come to the museum often just to tell me their Ouija story. Um, I've had everything from, you know, using the board, a mother using the Ouija board and it telling her that her husband was cheating on her and giving her the address, and then going to the address and finding the husband there. Um, that was a pretty good one. I mean, for my
Wow.
mother, she used it with her girlfriend Linda and my grandmother, and the board accurately predicted both of their future husbands' names,
Wow.
Lawrence and Dennis. So that's a pretty common story. Sometimes it's not full names like that; it's just initials and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I get them, and I kind of they're not in and out, but they're just like I just hear them all the time. That it's hard to really stick to one in particular.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the
Those are pretty
ones
good
that
ones.
the ones that stick with me are the ones that like where the boards have been donated, where they want to get rid of a board
Mm,
because they've had a bad experience with it, and so they perceive that it's causing them problems. And those, since you've been to the Salem location, I do have a few of those boards on display. And the Talking Board Historical Society actually has about 30 of those boards
mm,
total that have been donated. And those, I think, are some of the most interesting ones because they run it from, just uh, not comfortable to having it around them to flat out sending it with salt, with a Bible, or wrapped in a shroud, and, problems going on for months after they donate it. So those are the stories that really stick out to me because I have the item and it's kind of a constant reminder of what that story was.
Yeah.
has any of those items ever caused you any after effects or anything like that?
They have not. No, I mean, for me personally, I look at the Ouija board as just a tool to have a conversation, not, the entity, person, or whatever you're speaking with.
Mm,
So, I often just compare it to a cell phone. It's
mm,
a phone. And I think a lot of people tend to give it a lot more power than that. And which is, so I believe they believe all these different things they might experience. But in most situations with the Ouija, I don't think it's the board.
mm. True. Yeah,
Right.
it's a good
Huh.
outlook.
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be I mean, the alphabet itself would have to be haunted in some way then,
Yeah.
I guess, which, yeah, maybe it is. I don't know. Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I wondered if maybe like having all those things collected in one place caused some kind of, I mean, do other people, besides you have weird experiences in the museum?
Oh, sure, 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 sure. I mean, I deal with this daily where people have reactions. It could be physical reactions where they walk around with their head tilted back, they feel pressure on their head, their sinuses, they get dizzy, they pass out. Recently, I had someone pass out on the couch, and I don't know, a couple weeks ago, or no, well, 8 weeks ago, I had an ambulance and a fire truck at the museum for someone that passed out. So people have gotten sick um, back there and things like that. But I think the most interesting thing of all of that is I try not to influence anybody. I try not to like sway them in any way. I just kind of watch body language sometimes and wait till what people tell me. And the museum, the Salem location, has been known to have paranormal activity,
Hmm.
and one side of the room more active than the other. And I can watch people like maybe take one step into the room and quickly leave and not go back there the whole time they're in the museum. Or I can see people stop at the threshold and never go in the room. And it's not until I start telling stories that people will pull me aside at the end and be like, I didn't realize that was happening to me, but my body told me not to go in that room. It just reacted. And it wasn't until I say it. And I like that because, of the donated boards, one of them is a more recent board, a Stranger Things board from 2017, the TV
Huh.
show. And not what most people would think of something as haunted, much more recent.
Yeah.
But that board, years ago when I first put it in the museum, it was just mounted by itself on the wall. And it didn't, it was kind of out of context, and I'd have people that would walk right to it and they'd be like, I feel something with that board. And I'm like, of all the boards in the museum, the antiques, the vintage boards, you've walked up to almost the most recent one, and that's where you feel something. And coincidentally, oh, that's a board that was mailed away and they didn't put a return address on the package. They put a note in with the board that just said, you find it, uh, forward it to John. Trust me, you don't want it. Was
Hmm.
basically that's the only thing I know about it, but pretty amazing when I see reactions to people like that. And then, that's the physical stuff. The A lot of weird things happen in the space with technology. Everything from, it used to be film that would come back blurry, but then it turned into Polaroids being blurry. Polaroids where the image developed, they couldn't see it. I'm sorry, it would undevelop, then they couldn't see it. Then eventually cell phones. CNN has filmed a few times, both their batteries drained in their cameras. They couldn't explain what happened. That is pretty much a daily thing that people's phones break. The screens go black. On the Stranger Things board, it will be pixelated or pitch black on their cell phone screen. You can see everything else in the museum, but on the Stranger Things board, you'll
Hmm.
have these weird things happen. I had a guy with a really nice digital camera the other day, like huge lens on the thing. And after I told all the stories that happened with technology, he went back and looked at his pictures, and that Stranger Things board, it wasn't just like a little out of focus, it's a full blur. Like driving
Huh.
at night and like looking at like the Las Vegas Strip, it's just you see, it's just a glare. It's crazy. And he's a professional photographer, So that is a very common thing with technology.
Weird.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's
I'll have
crazy.
to check my photos from when I visited you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's common, you take the photos and you check them before you leave, but people come back constantly. John, I checked my photos, they're fine. Now they're messed up. Someone recently took a screen, they left the museum, they saw the picture was blurry, they took a screenshot, they came back to show me. When they got to the museum, that picture was actually fine. The screenshot was all crazy blurry. And then someone else recently waved from the store up front where you get your admission to the museum. I went up front. They're like, "Hey, John, we came to the museum a couple years ago. You told us about the weird stuff that happens with technology. We want you to know when we left the museum, our phones would not work. We
Hmm.
deleted the photos that we took in the museum, and the phones started working. So
Hmm.
it's pretty much a daily thing that I hear one of these stories.
Hmm. Interesting. And you kind of mentioned, thinking about the board as a sort of a phone booth or a communication method to the spirit world. What do you make of the process of closing out the conversation? Because when you first read about Ouija and the formalities of using the talking board, there's like this emphasis or importance on closing the conversation, almost as a means of like closing the portal, right?
Yeah, oh, well, I mean, that is a very popular rule that developed after the movie The Exorcist. That
Ah,
rule was not on the boards prior to that.
mm,
And if you want to go back to like the 1920s during that heyday with the Norman Rockwell Saturday Evening Post and stuff, the directions are it's a dating game in the 20s. It's all about, best played between a man and a woman, best
mm,
way with the board on your lap. So, that's how it is. But after The Exorcist, always say goodbye kind of became a rule. And you buy the newest Ouija board today, it'll say that on there. I often make a joke that, I don't say goodbye to most people I talk to today. So I don't believe that rule. But it's
mm.
the kind of thing that if you believe it, then you should do it. More than likely, if you don't say goodbye, then whatever the first bad thing that happens, you'll probably attribute back to not saying goodbye on the Ouija board. So I think your peace of mind, that's the best rules for the Ouija board is just your gut instinct, what you feel comfortable doing, and that should be it. But yeah, if you believe it, it's true.
Great stuff. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. So The Exorcist, I guess, I mean, are there other instances of, popular culture, in your view, really changing how people interact with this thing? I knew about the sort of dating kind of guy and lady aspect of the early part of it, but yeah, are there any other like milestones?
Yeah, well, I mean, The Exorcist is also responsible for never use the Ouija alone.
Hmm.
During a war, obviously, women would use them alone to maybe speak to a deceased husband or a father, something like that. But after that movie, that rule really kind of took root. And, you know, doesn't matter where it starts. If you believe it, don't do it because if you believe you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, that could influence what happens with the board. More recently, there was Ouija Origin of Evil that came out around 2016. And in that movie, there's a scene where the little girl takes the planchette, she looks through the eye, and she sees who she's been talking with on the Ouija board. Well, it's pretty funny because all these years later, I have a museum, and now I've had four people come in and insist it's something that's happened from the very beginning, even though there's not even a hole in the planchette back then. They're like,
Mm.
no, they
Huh.
did it when they were homemade. And so, I don't argue with people. I'll be like, okay, believe what you want to believe. But I've probably had another 25 people who will ask, oh, is that true? So they're at least aware. Because when I tell people the four people that insisted, I'll be like, no, that happened in the movie. And they're
Do
like,
you
I didn't
know?
see the movie. I'm like, well, you didn't see it, but someone you know saw it. So I think it very likely to become an urban legend that people might believe.
It's a really interesting connection with that, though, that I saw in a book, a fairy book. And it instructs you to take a twig and bend it into a ring. And if you look through this ring, you can view into the fairy world.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's weird, like a weird connection, kind of the same
Yeah, yeah,
process, but
sure.
it's embedded in this cultural object in this weird way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Salem and the witch shops, most of them would have hagstones in there.
Mm,
So you
Right.
go through
Yeah.
and look through and things like that. And, but as far as being to the Ouija board or to the planchette, uh, that seems to have started. We have no record of ever reading or hearing about anyone doing that prior to the
mm,
movie. So I feel pretty comfortable saying that that movie inspired people to start doing it now.
interesting. So what are some of your favorite pieces of media that have been inspired or have used the Ouija, the talking board, as a narrative element?
Well, I mean, certainly The Exorcist is fantastic because, the Ouija scene is just, it's so subliminal. They don't talk about it. And everyone in the world saw that movie. So I meet people from all over the world that come in, and if it's a country that doesn't sell the Ouija board, like say like Singapore, they are at least aware of it. Be like, wait a minute, this, they have no idea it's a real thing. Like there's real history behind it. But the Philippines and Vietnam, like people who have come in and be like, they are at least aware of it. So The Exorcist to me, I love it because it's the one movie pretty much everyone in the world has seen.
Mm,
There's over 500 horror movies that put the Ouija board in there. But I can't say most of them are big movies that everybody saw.
mm,
But my favorites of those, Witchboard, of course, from 1986. That was
mm,
really the
Yeah.
first starring role for the Ouija. And Kevin Tenney, the writer, gave us progressive entrapment, which is the more you use the Ouija board, the slowly it takes control of you to become more possession.
Mm,
So he takes it from The Exorcist and brings it a little bit more forward from there. I really loved like Veronica, which was a Spanish horror movie from like 2018, I think, and based on a true story. I thought that was a pretty creepy one. But I really, I mean, I there's a lot of the movies that I like uh, with the Ouija board in it, but there's a lot of trash too. Uh,
sure.
even though there's 500 horror movies. I can't say that, it's a higher percentage that are good than bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Huh.
mean, what's the first piece of fiction is Jap Heron?
Oh, you mean with people writing through the Ouija board?
Just in general, like the first piece of narrative fiction. I get, well, yeah, I guess then in that way it's using it as an actual tool. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of literature about the Ouija board for sure. Uh, but with Jap Heron, uh, they were claiming they were communicating with Mark Twain
Mm-hmm.
through the Ouija board, and Mark Twain dictated a book letter by letter back to them, which was published as Jap Heron. And there's actually a lot of those kind of stories. Um, I brought a Nona board. Funny enough, hold on. I brought this board here
Mm.
called the Nona, and
Upside down.
oh, is it? Oh, sorry. Here we go. Sorry. I can't see the screen. I'm just kind of putting it in front.
That's
The Nona board here, this from 1968 out in Independence, Missouri, a woman named Mildred Swanson, she claimed that she was communicating with Mark Twain through the board. And the
hmm.
conversations that they had through the Ouija board, through the Nona board, they published that as a book called God Bless Your Daughter. So Mark Twain has been pretty busy from beyond the grave writing books and talking to people through the Ouija board. Frank Baum, who was the author of The Wizard of Oz. There's a book from the 1920s. He supposedly wrote The Invisible Inzi of Oz, dictated it through a Ouija board to a 9 and 16-year-old kid. Um, and then, there are more recent stuff like James Merrill, who was a writer and a poet.
Yeah,
Who,
I love that book.
yeah,
Hmm.
the Ever-Changing Light of Sandover, which is a big ass book, but all written through the Ouija board. And that actually won a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, one of my favorite books, and what he gets out of the Ouija board is uh really really pretty singular.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, that's a really interesting terrain. The using it as a literary device is of a lot of interest to me. I mean, it's kind of built into it in some ways, but yeah. And then I guess in music there, that Mars Volta album,
Mm.
Yep.
True.
Bedlam and Goliath. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that one, it sounds great because when you put it in the context of all these other books that were supposedly written through the Ouija, that one, I want to say that, and I totally believed it until they said, I think they found the board at like a market in like Morocco or someplace
Right.
like that. And that's when I was like, I don't
Yeah.
know now because
Yeah.
this is just mostly an American thing and you don't see it in too many other countries. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in other countries, but I was like that part of wherever I forget where they said they found it. That was the part that was like a little less believable to me.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure.
Yeah. A little exotica to the story there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, it's like they claim it too. I mean, there's stuff like, Alice Cooper would claim that he took his name from speaking to a 16th century witch, 17th century witch, through the Ouija board named Alice Cooper. And then later on, he'll come back and say, no, no, I made that up. And then he'll come back later and go, no, no, it's true. So, you don't know what to believe, but it's at least it's a claim and made it into pop culture.
Yeah. It makes for a great story.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
How many people do you have come in that like sort of try to tell you or ask you if, the Ouija has this sort of ancient significance? I feel I mean, that happens a lot with tarot and like this
Yeah.
connection to ancient Egypt, but do people kind of have that impression about the Ouija board?
No, surprisingly, I think when I start telling the story, just like how I did with you guys here at the beginning, I'll get some eyes that'll open up wide. They're like, "Wait, why are you starting the story at like mid 1800s?" And then as I explain it, and then, once we get into like the evil of the Ouija board really being the capitalist side of it and getting into marketing and, it's Egyptian for good luck, or you see Egyptian themes on boards and things like that. And you start realizing like, oh, okay, maybe I'm thinking that because I'm seeing this imagery tied to it. They're making it seem like it's older than it really was to help sell it. They understand it a little better, but I'm very fortunate. I don't get a lot of people who are want to argue or be combative in any way. I've met someone that, even though I told him that Helen Peters, who named it, was only rediscovered 11 years ago, and I told him how it was rediscovered, all the research that was put in to find this story, putting in her headstone for her, they would still at the end be like, yeah, no, but it's German and French for yes, yes. And I'd say, yeah, no, that says it on the Ouija box for 70 years. You're 100% right. It said it for 70 years. But I'm trying to tell you something that happened before they started saying that. That is the real truth. So I've only had like, that's really been the only time that someone's really kind of argued with me a little bit
Yeah.
about it. Which is okay, whatever. I got worried one time. I had someone come in who was had a, I don't know if he was a priest. He had a clergy. He had a
Mm.
collar, and I thought to myself when I saw him, okay, here we go. You're gonna get like, someone that's gonna want to argue with you and stuff. And he was there for probably close to an hour. Asked a bunch of questions. I told him all these stories, and when we were done, he shook my hand. He said, "Thank you. You gave me a lot to think about." And I thought, I'm an asshole. I prejudged this guy just because he had a collar on. And I was a punk rocker in the 80s, and like, I got judged all the time for the way I looked. And I thought I thought I felt like an asshole for doing that. And so now I don't do that. I will give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And I'm very fortunate, people, they pay the money to come see me, and they're just kind of, if they're scared, they want to at least try to learn why they're scared about it. And I'm really grateful to that. I don't take that lightly. You leave your comfort zone to go in a place where you're trying to educate yourself. So I'm very fortunate. I only meet people who I think we connect in some way. All the guests, whether it's from a story I've told you, or just the fact that you've met somebody who probably different than most people that have a real passion for the history and the stories, and really gets to have a pretty awesome life talking about and showing off his collection.
Mm.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that if religious people ever came in with sort of an animosity, but I mean a perfect anecdote there. Do you have some favorite boards in your collection aesthetically that has really caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm an obsessed collector. So there are a lot of things that like I obsessively look for. I mean, I'd like to have any board I don't have, but there are certain boards that I don't have that I will spend way more time looking for, talking with people to try to find and that kind of thing. Um, in the collection, my favorite board is one of my favorite boards is my oldest one. It's from 1890. It doesn't have a logo on it. It's the Witchboard. It's one of only five known to exist. And to me, it's priceless. It's something that, like, you know, I know everyone wants to ask me, like, what would you pay or this and that. I use it as my example of, if someone came in the museum and offered me $1 million for it, it wouldn't buy it.
Mm.
$1 million wouldn't change my life, because tomorrow I want to be in a room talking with Ouija boards, and you've taken probably the oldest board away from me, and that only puts me at a disadvantage. So, you
Mm.
know, I worked a job for a very long time where I always thought about retiring and just getting done with this job. And now all I think about is trying to stay in good health, because I want to work till the day I die. I have
Mm.
no, I don't, there's no retirement plans for me. I would like to do this forever. So taking a board out of the collection that really tells a lot of stories for me is not good. So that's one of my favorite boards. But you know, I have metal boards. That's probably the one that people have heard me like talk obsessively talk about collecting. I drove 21 hours straight down to Florida to buy it, while other collectors try to make a deal for it. It's a really cool board. It's large, it's metal. The planchette was metal. It had a battery and a light bulb inside. There were bumps on the board. It would pass over and light up. And it's rare today. We know of 9 boards and 5 planchettes, but the obsession to acquire it, literally to hop in a car within 2 hours and just start driving there.
Yeah.
So aesthetically, that's one of my favorites. I'm glad you know who James Merrill is. My
Oh
friend
yeah.
Merch and I, we actually met one of his good friends, Peter, and we interviewed him in Boston in a brownstone in the Back Bay, and he told us that James had bought the house for him. So Merch and I were in essentially James Merrill's house.
Yeah.
We were so excited. We were there, asked him all these great questions, had so much great conversations. We were there for about 5 hours. And at the end of the day, he handed Merch and I both a teacup. So James Merrill made his own talking board, wrote it out, put punctuation, and he used a teacup with the handle as a pointer. And Peter
Mm.
handed Merch and I both a teacup and said, James and I use these. So some of that poetry that won the Pulitzer Prize, we have teacups that are from that
Wow.
set, possibly used. But
Yeah.
just that story of being able to hang out with a guy and hear such amazing stories, a guy older in life who I don't think tells the stories to a lot of people, and someone that knew James Merrill, and pretty amazing. And have that experience with my best friend Merch. So that teacup, it's not a board, but it's something in the museum that I prize very much. So that
Oh
if
yeah.
something, if I had to rescue, one thing from the museum, my grandmother's board and that teacup might be the two things I don't know which one
Mm.
I'd go for, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. I'm a little jealous of the teacup. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say enough good things about that book, so I won't. But yeah. Huh. So I'm stuck on this metal board that lights up. What is the story
Yeah,
with that?
same. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had one here to show you, but it's from 1933 and it's called the Electric Mystifying Oracle. And it's a pretty large board, like I said, metal. And the funny thing is that the company put all their capital into producing it. People loved it. The salespeople went and demonstrated it. People loved it. But in 1933, the Great Depression, it didn't sell very well. It was a flop. And so, literally years later, the company scrapped all of them for the war effort. And so it's a rare board now, like I said, not one of nine. But my friend Merch, he actually got to meet Hubert Fuld. Hubert was the president of Ouija back in 1933. He met him on his deathbed. And he went to go interview him, brought the board, handed it to Hubert, who was lying in bed. And Hubert took it and smiled and handed it right back. It was like, I never want to see that board again. He had not seen it for, close to 70 years, but he was reminded that it almost ruined the family business.
Mm.
He said that the failure was justified. He shouldn't have messed with the success of the Ouija.
Mm.
So even in 1933, the Great Depression, where you think no one wants to spend money on a Ouija board, wrong. They had 3 factories just in Baltimore alone
Wow.
producing the Ouija board. So I think it's just such a great story because, we really only think of that one image when we think of Ouija. And when you come to the museum, you see hundreds, if not thousands, of different other competitors and boards. That's really how iconic that one Ouija brand is.
Mm. That's amazing. Is there one text that you think everybody should read concerning the Ouija?
I don't have something great to suggest. I mean, just for the fact that Helen was only rediscovered 11 years ago.
Mm.
So really anything in print older than that is not going to be the most accurate. I would say, tbhs.org, the website for the Talking Board Historical Society. We have information about her and that. WilliamFold.com is a great resource because Merch has really a lot of his research putting stuff together. But as far as in print, I don't have anything I would suggest
Mm.
for about the history.
Sure, sure.
Huh. Yeah, it's
Excellent stuff. Yeah.
kind of like Pamela the Coleman Smith uh tarot stuff
Tara, yeah.
where she's kind of, a lot of the older texts will mention her as an artist, but only in the last 20 years or so, it seems she's kind of been given
Mm.
the credit she deserves as kind of
Yep.
creating the aesthetic, at least of the 20th century for the
Yep.
deck. So I imagine eventually there will be a new like standard text on boards that,
I hope so. I mean,
yeah,
it's tough because, uh, in general, we don't make as many books as we used to. You know what I mean? I would love for that to happen. Um, but luckily, the Smithsonian magazine did a whole article about Helen, which helped get the story out there. TV shows like Mysteries of the Museum have done episodes. Um, so, for getting her story out there, I think we've done a pretty good job doing that. But as far as the overall all history, yeah, I would look forward to having that come out.
Mm. So where can people find information about the museums and how to visit?
Yeah, I mean, witchboardmuseum.com. We'll give you information about Baltimore and Salem. And then, you can always just come in person to Salem, right downtown, 127 Essex Street. If you're in Baltimore, you can visit the museum in Hamden on Chestnut, corner of Chestnut and 36th. But websites, tbhs.org. And then I'm always on Instagram more than I am like Facebook or anything else. So Salem Witchboard Museum or Witchboard Museum Baltimore for Instagram, where I try to post, tell stories whenever I can. Then TikTok, whatever. But I'm not
Mm.
really, there's too many damn platforms these days. I
Yeah.
Yeah,
know it's hard for me to really keep up. I'm a one-man show running the two museums, and I don't get as much free time doing that.
Mm.
right. Yeah, how do
Yeah.
you run both? You just kind of move between the two and have employees in the other hours, or
No, I'm a one-man show. So Salem, from July 4th to Thanksgiving, I don't take a day off. I work 7 days a week for the last 7 years. Um, Baltimore is a self-guided museum, and so I will go down and change things out like every couple months, swap things around. But they're self-guided, so the store bazaar, they run it for me. You pay admission to them, they allow you access to the space. And Salem, once the slow season starts, December, January, then I'll finally start taking days off. And but I'll already be like starting to rotate things through. So
oh,
I
I
have
see.
roughly 600 boards in my house right here,
Mm.
and then I have the two museums. So as soon as the busy season stops, I will start changing out Salem. Anything I take out of there might go to Baltimore, stuff from my house go to Baltimore, and I'll just start the big rotation of whatever I think is the most interesting stories to tell in the locations.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. That's great. I mean, that's awesome. It's obviously a labor of love or obsession, I guess, too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Which,
Yeah, I think
Oh,
it's
it's an
good.
obsession. It's a
yeah.
serious obsession for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's great you opened the second museum in Baltimore though, with the history being right there. That's
Yep.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I met so many people from the Baltimore area that would come up to Salem, and then they'd tell me they're from Baltimore. I'm like, you get a red carpet tour, hold on. And then I'd start telling the backstories to Elijah Bond's headstone in Greenmount Cemetery that looks like a Ouija board, and how that came about. The TBHS raising the money, put that in. And then where the Ouija was named is now a 7-Eleven, and we were able to get a plaque. We got permission from the corporate 7-Eleven to put the plaque up there. The factory that fell from, that the Ouija board told them to build, that is the state of Maryland's first public landmark today. We worked with the
Hmm.
state for 2 years to convince them. So there's a lot of great Baltimore history, and I wanted to put that as close to Baltimore as possible so that people didn't have to come all the way to Salem to learn about stuff that they were already kind of aware of. I mean, the Bond Stone in Greenmount, most people around there are familiar with the Ouija headstone, but at this point, it's 18 years later, and people just don't know how it even came about, you know? So I think it's pretty cool to tell those stories, the backstories to how these things came about.
Mm. Amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Huh.
Yeah. Well, excellent stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. And
Sure.
yeah, really, really enjoyed that. Great stuff.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. If you ever want to do a follow-up, I'm happy to come back anytime.
For
Absolutely.
sure.
Hopefully there will be
Yeah.
some new spooky stories collected from people's experiences on the board.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
I gotta have a confession booth or something like that. Make it
Yeah.
easier for me to remember.
That's a good
That's a good
idea.
idea. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
confession box.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this interview. Me and Ben are going to head over to Patreon to do an afterwards, talk about some stuff that we've been experimenting with and looking at. So hang on the line for that. If you're not a member, patreon.com/consensusunreality. We'll catch you next time. Oh, I'm recording.
Oh, all right.
And
Well,
we're back. I can do it twice.
I am
On
old
Patreon.
now.
Ben is so much older. You've grown through the channeled years of the Ouija board. Insightful, incredible stuff. Amazing backstory. How he first got into Ouija boards. I didn't even realize that. I almost kind of assumed that Witchboard he put into the title. Direct you to patreon.com/consensusunreality. For just $5 a month, you can unlock over 150 hours of ongoing exclusive episodes, written content, our printed Journal of Shells publication, our Discord server, and more. So check that out. You'll get access to the second half of this interview immediately by signing up at patreon.com/consensusunreality.